In the smoldering aftermath of Russia's most ferocious aerial assault on Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky delivered a defiant and transformative address to his nation and the world. Standing amidst the debris of a heavily damaged residential street with the shell of a blackened apartment building looming behind him, President Zelensky's tone shifted from one of resilient defense to one of resolute offense. In a speech that will undoubtedly be remembered as a pivotal moment in the conflict, he declared that the time for containing Russian aggression was over. He announced a stark and uncompromising new strategic objective for Ukraine: the complete political and ideological dismantling of the current government in Moscow. This call for regime change, delivered with a raw and palpable fury, fundamentally altered the declared aims of the war. It pushes the conflict into a new and far more dangerous phase, effectively closing the door on any near-term diplomatic solution and presenting a direct challenge not only to the Kremlin, but also to the cautious de-escalation strategy favored by President Donald Trump's administration in Washington. The Ukrainian president, foregoing his usual indoor studio for the grim backdrop of his wounded capital, spoke with an intensity that captured the nation's grief and rage. "Look around you," he began, gesturing to the surrounding devastation. "This is not a military operation. This is terrorism. This is the true face of the regime in the Kremlin. For years, the world has tried to reason with it, to negotiate with it, to contain its ambition. They have answered our appeals for peace with hypersonic missiles. They have answered the world's call for dialogue with a campaign of murder against innocent civilians in their sleep." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "We have defended our land with courage. We have mourned our dead with dignity. But defense is no longer enough. To simply push this evil back to its border is to merely pause the threat. It is to guarantee that our children, or their children, will have to face the same terror again when the beast feels strong enough to reemerge. That is a future I and the people of Ukraine refuse to accept." It was then that he made his historic declaration, moving beyond the liberation of Ukrainian territory as the ultimate war aim. "Therefore, today, I am setting a new goal for our nation and for every nation that values freedom and life." President Zelensky announced, "The only way to ensure a lasting and just peace for Ukraine, for Europe, and for the world is the complete dismantling of the current criminal regime in the Kremlin. This is not just a war for our territory anymore. This is a war for our very existence against a tyranny that seeks to extinguish us. And it is a war for the future of Russia itself. We have no quarrel with the Russian people, with the musicians, the writers, the scientists, the everyday citizens who are also victims of this dictatorship. We appeal to them directly. Your silence is your prison. Your compliance is their weapon. The path to a free and prosperous Russia, a Russia that is a respected member of the community of nations, does not run through Kyiv, it runs through the Kremlin, and it requires you to cast off your oppressor." He concluded by vowing that Ukraine would use every means at its disposal, military and diplomatic, to support what he called the inevitable democratic transformation of Russia, framing the fight as a shared struggle for freedom against a common oppressor. The speech immediately unified Ukrainian society, galvanizing a population still reeling from the overnight attack. Political leaders from across the spectrum in Kyiv rallied behind their president, echoing his call. The head of Ukraine's military intelligence publicly stated that his agency would intensify all efforts to assist liberation movements within the Russian Federation. On the front lines, the message was received as a powerful morale booster. Commanders reported that the speech had injected a renewed sense of purpose into their troops, framing their brutal defensive battles as part of a larger, more noble cause. The narrative was no longer simply about survival. It was about achieving a final victory over the source of the aggression itself. The domestic political effect was to silence any lingering whispers of a negotiated settlement that would cede territory, solidifying the national consensus around a maximalist vision of victory. However, the international reaction to President Zelensky's declaration was far more complex and divided, most notably creating a significant public policy rift with the Trump administration. In Washington, President Zelensky's call for regime change was met with immediate and significant pushback. The administration, already frustrated by Vladimir Putin's violent rejection of its ultimatum, now found itself contending with an ally whose war aims had expanded far beyond what the White House considered achievable or desirable. President Donald Trump, in a series of posts on his Truth Social platform, made his administration's position clear. I understand President Zelensky is angry, and he has every right to be after the horrible attack on Kyiv, he wrote. But talk of regime change in Russia is reckless and foolish. Our policy is America first, which means ending this war, not expanding it into World War III. We need a deal. We need peace. Regime change is a mess. It doesn't work, and it is not America's job. Ukraine must focus on defending its borders, which we are helping them do. This sentiment was formalized through official channels. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking to reporters, chose his words carefully to avoid directly criticizing the leader of a nation under attack while simultaneously distancing the United States from his new policy. The United States stands with the people of Ukraine in their valiant defense of their sovereignty, Secretary Rubio began. President Zelensky's passion is born from the horrific suffering his people have endured. However, the policy of the United States government is not one of regime change in Russia. Our focus is and will remain on providing Ukraine with the means to defend its internationally recognized borders and creating the conditions for a diplomatic resolution to this conflict. We believe that is the most responsible and effective path to a stable and lasting peace. He emphasized that any change in Russia's government is a matter for the Russian people to decide. This policy was further cemented by the Department of Defense. Secretary Peter Hegseth issued a clarifying statement regarding American military aid. U.S. military assistance to Ukraine is for the sole purpose of defending the nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The statement read, "The equipment, training, and intelligence support provided by the United States is to be used for defensive operations to repel the Russian invasion. It is not intended to facilitate or support offensive operations aimed at changing the governing structure of the Russian Federation." This statement was a clear signal to Kyiv that American weapons were not to be used in any potential cross-border incursions or action designed to destabilize the Russian state itself, drawing a firm line that delineated the limits of American support. In Europe, the reaction was more fragmented. The leader of nations bordering Russia, particularly Poland and the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, privately and in some cases publicly expressed sympathy with President Zelensky's position. For them, the current Kremlin leadership represents an existential threat, and the idea of its removal is seen as the only true guarantee of their own long-term security. The Polish Prime Minister remarked that President Zelensky has spoken a difficult truth that many are afraid to say out loud. Lasting peace in Europe is not possible with the current regime in the Kremlin. However, in the major power centers of Western Europe, there was deep apprehension. Leaders in Berlin and Paris, while issuing strong condemnations of the Russian attack on Kyiv, were visibly uncomfortable with the rhetoric of regime change. They worried that such a policy would eliminate any remaining off-ramps for de-escalation, provoke an even more violent and unpredictable reaction from Moscow, and risk the catastrophic destabilization of a nuclear-armed state. A French government spokesperson stated that France's goal is to help Ukraine with the war and restore its sovereignty, which will in itself create a new strategic reality for Russia, carefully avoiding any endorsement of an explicit regime change policy. Predictably, the reaction from Moscow was one of incandescent rage. The Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, held a press conference where He labeled President Zelensky a Western puppet and a terrorist whose own people to remove him from power. He stated that President Zelensky's speech was definitive proof of what Russia had been saying all along, that the true goal of Ukraine and its Western backers was not the defense of Ukraine, but the strategic destruction of the Russian state. This is no longer a special military operation against a nationalist regime in Kyiv, Peskov declared. This is now a declaration of a total war against the Russian Federation and its people. Every Russian citizen must now understand that this is an existential fight for the motherland. Russian state television went into overdrive, endlessly replaying clips of President Zelensky's speech with commentary that framed it as a neo-Nazi declaration of intent to dismember Russia. The speech was a powerful gift to Kremlin propagandists, allowing them to portray the conflict as a defensive war for national survival and to rally the Russian population around the flag in the face of what was now being presented as an existential foreign threat. The strategic implications of President Zelensky's new stance are profound and far-reaching. By officially declaring regime change in Moscow as a war aim, he has raised the stake to the highest possible level. For the Kremlin, the war is no longer about controlling territory in the Donbass. It is now explicitly about the survival of the government itself. This is likely to lead to an even greater mobilization of Russian state resources for the war effort and an even more brutal and unrestrained prosecution of the conflict. Any possibility of a negotiated settlement, already remote, has now likely vanished for the foreseeable future, as there is no common ground between Kyiv's demand for regime change and Moscow's demand for regime survival. President Zelensky has made a high-stake gamble. He may have hoped to inspire a global coalition to help him achieve his goal, but he has instead exposed and deepened the division between Ukraine and its most powerful partner, the United States. He has also placed his European allies in an incredibly difficult position. The war has now been rhetorically transformed from a regional conflict over territory into a global ideological struggle, a dangerous escalation that makes the path to peace harder to find than ever and significantly increase the risk of a direct confrontation between Russia and the West. The world now watches as a war of attrition on the battlefield is matched by a war of rhetoric where the very existence of government is at stake. Many of my listeners, like 70%, haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel. And so many of you don't even know that you haven't subscribed. And that is actually what makes the show going. It's almost like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask again and again, because it enables us to grow and grow and grow. And we're going for the long haul here. And listen, if this is your first time listening to World Global Conflict, you don't have to subscribe. You guys, your first one's on me. But if you have watched this show before, it's like you are a freeloader now. So all I would ask you is, if you have seen this show before and you like it, help me, help my team here. Hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. That I swear. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. That's all for me for today, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.